Good morning. I'm Linda Hamilton, and on behalf of the New West Symphony League, welcome to Meet the Artist. We're delighted to have Maestro Boris Brott with us this morning to interview our guest artist, Jan Lisiecki. Jan's amazing career began with an orchestral debut at the age of 9. And the 7 years since then, that career has been on a stunning upward trajectory. Maestro Brott has been in concert with Jan several times, and he considers him one of the most amazing young talents on the concert stage today. We extend a warm welcome to both of them and look forward to a fabulous concert on Saturday night when the New West Symphony celebrates the 200th anniversary of Chopin. So, welcome, Maestro Brott and Jan Lisiecki.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here again and to share this morning with you, particularly with a person whom I have come to know and love over the last, well, how many years now? 7, approximately? No, can't be 10.
Can't be 10.
No, 7 years.
6.
7 years. Anyway, Jan is truly an extraordinary young man, as you will soon discover. And I thought I might start out by asking Jan how he first developed an interest in music.
Well, I started first playing the piano after a teacher at schools told my parents that it might be a good idea if I started playing an instrument. I was very good at school already, and so this teacher said, well, maybe to keep him slowed down in school, maybe, let him start an instrument. It'll keep him busy after school. So my parents chose the piano for me. Nobody in my family is a musician, I should point out. They're along for the ride with me, which is quite fun. And so that's how I started playing the piano, and I've enjoyed it ever since. And it didn't slow me down in school, by the way.
So you started the piano when you were how old?
I was 5.
You were 5. And it's sort of overtaken your life in many ways in terms of travel. You love to travel, I know that. You have a particular interest in flying. Talk a little bit about your interest in flying.
Well, it seems to me, things develop, of course, hobbies and passions because you do them. And for me, I'm very lucky because I do enjoy traveling and I do enjoy flying and all the parts involved with it. And I don't have problems with jet lag, any of those things. So I'm very lucky because obviously being a pianist, if you have problems, it's quite difficult.
Yes, of course. Now, you had a birthday gift recently from your dad, or I don't know who gave who the gift, but you decided that as a present you would travel around the world in how many hours or days?
It was very much so in hours. Obviously, I collect lots of points, and when I travel, so
otherwise it's pointless.
Welcome to Boris's jokes, the first of many, I promise. So with this pointless travel, I booked with these points a trip around the world. So I got to fly with my dad. Actually, for my dad's birthday, we were in Hong Kong on my dad's birthday. And in 5 days, we went to Asia from Calgary, where I live in Canada, from Calgary to Europe, to Asia, and back through Europe to Canada again. So we didn't really go around the world, but the distance traveled was actually more, so...
And that was for fun?
That was for fun.
You didn't actually have to go anywhere?
No.
That's my idea of hell. I don't know about certainly not my idea of what I would do for fun. You've also pursued a normal education in a public school. At what stage are you at now?
Well, as I said, it didn't really slow me down in school, so initially I skipped kindergarten completely, so I went to grade 1.
You'll come back to that later.
Yeah, I'll come back to that later.
Yes.
So, that's quite normal. It happens with various kids, so that was completely normal. But then afterwards, when I was in grade 5, the principal of my elementary school said to my parents that, well, I'm going to take him for a little bit of a challenge, and he'll be going for one course to a high school, which is quite close, just to learn and to see, to do something more advanced. So I started with math grade 10 when I was 9. So that was quite different. And then I went on to English, and by grade 6, the principal had decided that it would be best for me to skip junior high. And my parents were completely opposed to that because they were thinking, I'd miss I wouldn't be with my peers and everything. But it actually worked out quite well because I am pretty tall, and nobody could tell really that I am younger, and then I would be away from school much because I was traveling. So I think most kids would think I have some bad illness or something because I would be traveling so much and not be there. So,
how has this affected your career, affected your normal, natural interchange with people your own age? Has it affected it in a positive, in a negative sense? What do you feel about relationships with your peers in terms of age?
I think it's a very positive effect because I feel like I can communicate equally well with all ages. I don't have, I'm very used to spending lots of time with adults. I'm used to being with kids. I like working with both. So I think it's a very nice advantage to be able to work equally well with all ages. And by the way, I didn't finish. I did graduate from high school this January. So.
Now, what about university? Do you intend to pursue a university career, or will that take a second place to what is for you an absolutely burgeoning career on the concert stage? You've just signed a recording agreement with Deutsche Grammophon, which is one of the, probably now, certainly among the classical music recording industry, people or firms within the recording industry, the most important thing you can get as a young artist, as an artist of any age, because they are probably the only company still producing classical discs of any consequence. And so what's that like? And you're touring, you're playing with orchestras all over the world. In a sense, you're living a young man's dream as an artist.
Well, I think, again, as I said, I really love it, and I feel really privileged and lucky that I'm able to do it. And I still realize that there is a normal life and that I still have to have education no matter what. I mean, being an artist is not only playing piano. I think there's a difference between being just a pianist and being a musician and being an artist. Of course, just a good pianist means you can play technically very well, and that's my definition at least. You can play technically very well, you understand the music, you do a good job. And then being a musician is that you understand the whole scope of music. And being an artist is that, well, you understand much more of life. So I'm still working to being a musician and artist. So.
Well, I think you obviously have that innate within you. I remember the very first time I heard you perform, I think the one thing that set you apart from other young people, and I hear a great many young artists, was the sense that you seemed to have an old soul. You seem to be highly mature in your performance. I remember, and I will relate this anecdote because we first ran across Jan when I was touring with the National Arts Centre Orchestra in the west of Canada. And Jan played for a cellist in the orchestra. I think it was part of a competition that you wrote.
There was this competition called the Canada Music Competition. It's a Canada-wide competition. Important for young people. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, he phoned me and he said, look, you absolutely have got to hear this person because he's quite amazing. Just his talent is extraordinary. And actually, I didn't get to hear him at this point, but Pinchas did. And he called me and he said, we got to include him. You're the next person with a program that we can actually feature him on. It's a family concert. Would you be willing to include him in the program? And I said, well, with your recommendation, of course. And he said, well, he's going to play Mozart D minor piano concerto. And I said, well, that's fine. Well, we'll have to work out cuts, because I thought, well, all of the movements are too long to put on a family concert and amuse kids. So Pinchas said, no, I want you to do the whole of the first movement. And I said, Pinchas, it's 12 minutes long. I mean, the audience, we're going to go, parents are going to have to chain the kids down to the seats. Because normally the attention span of kids, even with their parents in that kind of an atmosphere, is about 4 to 5 minutes maximum. And Pinchas kept insisting, no, you have to do the whole thing. He can't do the cuts. He said, I know you like cuts, but it's just believe me, trust me. So I said, okay, I'll trust you. But I said, it's going to be a disaster. So anyway, he came and he played. And it was the most incredible experience because this audience, no more educated than any other audience, of parents and children from, I guess, around the age of 3 or 4, where they would be the youngest kids, up until 80, because often the grandchildren bring the kids, were sitting in rapt attention, in absolute silence for 12 minutes, and then they just absolutely erupted in applause and a standing ovation. And I've been doing these concerts for well over 20 years, and I never had an experience quite like that. And I was very curious as to why. And I really, the only way I can explain it is that we all of you have a natural ability to assess brilliance and talent. And you don't have to have a lot of information. In fact, very often information can serve against you. I always say that audiences get paralysis from analysis. And I think in this instance it's true. But I mean, not to end up flattering you, you have a large enough head as it is. But it just was a wonderful experience. And every experience I've had since then with Jan, and we have performed in excess of a dozen times together with various orchestras. And it's always the same, that he has this wonderful ability to communicate the essence of the music, the musical message of the composer, which is beyond playing the notes, and it's infused within the notes. And he also, you will note in the performances that you will hear that he has a very special way of connecting with the composer, whether it's Mozart, who is very different in spirit than Chopin or Rachmaninoff. They're all different artists coming from different backgrounds, but he has a way of bringing the essence of that music out. And okay, I won't make your head grow any larger.
May I translate that a little bit?
Of course, with pleasure. You see, part of the fun of this, and also its challenge, is that we've known each other since he was that high, and he's about twice as high now as he was then. And there's a certain familiarity. And it's almost like having another child, in the sense that, the way children always challenge you, and it's a bit of a somewhat respectful relationship, but not necessarily. And that's our relationship, so you don't get surprised. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You would realize I'm not calling Maestro Boris Brott Maestro, because we are really worked together so many times, and I feel very close.
And I asked you not to.
Yes, that too. So anyways, to translate what Boris was saying, I feel that when I'm playing, the most essential thing is to have a communication with the audience. If it is, often when you're playing a recital in a hall maybe of this size, if you just go on stage and you play very well, you come off, the audience still feels like there's that barrier between you, the musician, as if you're some alien from an outer world.
You are for them.
Yeah, for them.
Yes.
Until you speak to them, I feel, or until you somehow communicate with them, because then you feel like you're a human being. If you'd speak just slightly about the piece, say a few things, then it also communicates very well with the audience, because they feel like, well, he's a human being, he can talk. So that's definitely very important for me. And I also feel that the most important thing is not to show how well you can play something, but to show how beautifully it was composed, because the true talent and beauty was within the composers. I mean, here we are, we're just interpreting what they have done, and the true art is what they have done, and then we just take it and show it to the best of our abilities, to show it how beautifully they have done it. And of course the interpretations vary, because you may see it differently, how the composer wrote things down. So I feel that's the most important thing.
Well, in many ways music is wonderful because it is imprecise, and it's part of its beauty is its imprecision. The language of music itself is a language that, unlike mathematics, leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Now, you may disagree, because I know you're a math genius as well, and I'm sure that, as in the case of the law, which we all think is defined, in mathematics there are many things I'm sure that are equally loose and open to interpretation. But in music, really, you require the services of an interpreter, somebody to actually play the notes. The composer writes them down, but there's, the word allegro, for example. What does it mean? It means happy in Italian. Does it have a specific tempo reference? People put metronome markings down. because Mr. Maelzel in the time of Beethoven figured out a way of dividing time in such a way that, you know, so many meters to the second gives you a tempo. And what's really quite fascinating from my perspective in interpreting Beethoven's music is that often Beethoven's metronome markings are quite crazy. And if you actually followed them, the tempos would be so fast they'd be almost unplayable in some instances. So I think it's all a matter of interpretation. What does allegro mean? What does largo mean? What does larghetto mean? There's so many, they're really moods more than anything, and the artist really has to infuse in that marking life. He has to give life to that. So it's a two-stage creative process.
I like how Boris said that music is a language, because music really is a language, but it's not a concise language. You can't say, you know, hi, how are you doing? I had eggs for breakfast today.
Can't? I do it all the time. No.
You can say that, you know, I'm happy and here weather's beautiful, but somebody else might interpret it, you know, well, it's a nice day and it's cold outside. You know, everybody can interpret it differently. You get the general sense of something, but everybody can see it in their own way, which I think is very beautiful and very special, because I mean, there's also the same thing in most forms of art. You have the same kind of ability to interpret things.
Absolutely. Except in the case of music, I think music and the graphic arts have this in common, in that they are international languages. The moment you get into theater, of course, you get into the barrier of language, and likewise in opera, you get into the barrier of language. But we've been talking a lot and not playing at all. So would you like to play something for us?
Okay. Should I play it slow or fast?
Start with slow.
Okay. So I'll play a waltz by Chopin.
I think one of the things that I've admired most about you, Jan, is that you bring a simplicity to your playing. It's not, it's a wonderful kind of connection to the music, and yet it isn't over the top. It isn't to the point of where the gesticulation and the histrionics take over the music. And very often, I mean, we live in an era where both for conductors as well as performing artists, the wilder you are, the more hair you have, and the more wild your gestures.
You're just jealous of my hair, Boris.
Well, I never had beautiful hair like that. I never had red hair. I always wanted to date someone with that colored hair, but I never did. But no, I'm not jealous of your hair. But I was trying to pay you a compliment, obviously without success. But you know, and a lot of the sort of concert stage stars today, and I won't name names because that's obviously awful to do, but they owe their success to histrionics, to being over the top. And one of the things that I really admire about Jan's playing is that it has a sense of restraint, and yet all of the music comes forward. You're going to perform music by two composers in the concert that we're doing. There is a small error, I believe, in the folder that you have. It's not Chopin's 21st Concerto. He never wrote 21 concerti. It is Mozart's Concerto number 21 that you will hear at the concert, and Chopin's first concerto. What are the differences between interpretation of Mozart and that of Chopin, in your view?
Well, I mean, I think the only similarity really you can say is that, of course, Chopin loved Mozart, and it's still music for the piano. Otherwise, I think you have to approach it completely differently, other than thinking of it as music. It's very difficult to describe, because there's Mozart, who is an amazing composer. He writes very simply, but there is such a hidden message in what he writes. It always seems to be happy. What he writes, 90% of his music, most of his music, when you listen to it, you think that it's, you know, he was a happy person, it's happy music. But of course, from history, we know that he wasn't a happy person. And without getting, you know, into the history too much, you can look into the music and see that within the music itself, that he's hiding some, you know, very deep emotions within those, the shade of happiness. You just peel off that layer and you can see lots of other things underneath it, which is a lot of fun because you get to explore those things that aren't necessarily, that don't end up being audible necessarily, but that change maybe the color of how you're playing the piece. Then Chopin, of course, is a very romantic composer. There's always that Polish element in his music, and of course, as well, there's the lament of leaving Poland, the sadness, the deep sorrow that he really had. In all of his music, there's sorrow after leaving Poland, or some kind of sorrow one way or another. It seems like that was his way of expressing himself. I mean, the concerto, the Chopin Concerto number 1, is a really beautiful concerto. It is... as a whole, there are some concertos that work very well. You know, you have a first movement, second movement, third movement, and they're separate things. Both the Chopin and the Mozart Concerto are fantastic pieces as a whole. You can listen to them from beginning to end, and they make sense together. It feels like you've just listened to one piece, not 3 separate pieces. Both of them have that in common. Of course, the Chopin, some people would say, is much more difficult technically, and in some ways it is, although I must say that just because it's faster and louder doesn't mean it's more technically difficult. Mozart has some... The simpler things get, I like to say, the more fun it is, because you get to... I mean, you can... It's really easy to learn it. You just sit down, you play the music a few times, you can play it already, that's no problem. But then to play it well takes much longer, because it's so easy to play that you're not thinking about it. So you have to consciously think about what you'd like to do to make it interesting. I mean, there's things that occur. Yesterday we had a rehearsal that occur 3 times, for example. One, all in a row. So once, twice, third time, the same thing. And you can't play it 3 times the same, because, I mean, it is the same music, but it doesn't have to be played the same way. So we were having fun with that.
Well, in a sense, if the composer repeats himself 3 times, you want to give a different. You need. I always feel that you need to lead the audience and the music to some element of arrival. That the departure or the change in that playing that thing 3 times provides interest and can be different every time that you perform it. I feel there is a similarity in many ways. Well, the original program that I had constructed for this, which Jan wanted to change because he's going to record the 21st Piano Concerto later the year for Deutsche Grammophon, and he wanted to have a chance to play it in as much as possible. But my original concept of this program was the growth of Romanticism, from Beethoven, leading from Beethoven through to Chopin. But as I think about it, it's not really changed to that extent by the inclusion of Mozart. Because when I think of Mozart, I also think of Mozart as being a romantic. Even though he was more hidebound by classical form than that the period would allow and that the time would allow than Beethoven, who simply threw all the rules out and threw them in the garbage and decided that he was going to do what he felt like doing.
His music is very, flirtatious. You listen to it, and there's these little things, and you always think about it as. Mozart was also a crazy character like me.
There's great similarities. He was bumptious, just like you. But you're better behaved than he was.
I'm sure.
You're much better behaved than apparently he was. I didn't know him, but I do know you.
Well, I'm behaved on stage, but if you see me off stage, then you won't recognize me. No, I'm kidding. There's the similarity.
No, you're not.
Anyways, there's a similarity. You feel the energy that he had was unlimited, and that was really true. He was an extremely energetic person, and that shows in his music. On the other hand, in Chopin, there's the feeling of something heavy, something really, you have to. There's the feeling of, I don't know. It's very hard to describe. You can't really. Music is definitely worth more than 1,000 words. You can't describe it.
That's because music continues where words leave off.
Yeah.
So, anytime we try to describe music, everybody wants us to describe it in writing or in words, and it's an impossible thing to do because you get all tongue-tied in the process. Because how do you explain how you feel about something? It's very hard to do it. Even the psychiatrists have problems. Basically what they do is they sit there and they make you describe it. I don't think fair, but we won't go into that. One of the aspects about performing Chopin, particularly with orchestra, now Chopin didn't write very much for orchestra, and I'm glad he didn't. And the main reason is that it is so rhapsodic. That there's so much rubato that often it's an extremely difficult thing to keep a performance alive and keep it together with the orchestra, because the pianist, by nature, you take a waltz that we just heard. I'd hate to dance to a waltz the way you just played it. You'd be delaying and pushing and pulling, and you'd step on each other's feet. It would be a real problem. And this is characteristic of the playing of Chopin. That it is highly rubato in the sense of rubato. The word rubato means literally to rob one part of the phrase in order to be able to give it back at the other part of the phrase. But it means that the rhythm is not consistent and is mercurial and changes all the time in interpretation. So for a conductor, it is really a challenge to play with a pianist, to accompany this music with a pianist. Also, from the standpoint of the orchestra, it's really not very interesting to play, because he doesn't write very well for the orchestra. It just is, in a sense, in the service of the piano, as opposed to Mozart.
I disagree that he doesn't write very well. No, because he's not writing a piano concerto with an orchestra. He's writing a piano concerto for piano with orchestra, fiddling in there, kind of.
Precisely.
So
I rest my case.
So it's not bad writing, because I think his intention, both piano concertos are in the sense that if I can play those piano concertos solo, and with some orchestral parts in between, and you would not notice that it's a concerto that I'm playing solo. So it's not bad writing. It's just intended to be, kind of like an enrichment of the piano.
I just think Mozart is a greater orchestral composer. His use of the orchestra is more natural to the orchestra. if you think of the two, I mean, it's very difficult. I don't want to defend it because it'll take forever and people will get bored. But in any case, to say that Mozart, I think you wouldn't disagree that Mozart has a command of the orchestra in a way that Chopin doesn't quite.
For sure. I mean, if I tried playing a Mozart concerto, on the other hand, alone without orchestral accompaniment, you would notice that there's lots missing. So there isn't a better or worst, I think. It's just a very different way of writing.
And he's so diplomatic. It's marvelous. You were going to play something flashier. What?
I'd like to play some Rachmaninoff, actually. A Prelude in C-sharp minor, Opus 3, number 2.
Obviously, you're getting older, and therefore Rachmaninoff. Go.
I told you.
You're a young person, and audiences that we play for in terms of classical music tend to be made up more of older people. There is a challenge, a disconnect, if you will, between what we do and our audience. in the sense of young people's, it being attractive to young people. You and I have participated together in children's concerts. We did a concert together called Beethoven and the Bully, which my wife helped me write, which was on the subject of bullying. And the idea, of course, that Beethoven himself was bullied by his father and then turned around and bullied his nephew, Karl, whom he got custody of. And it's a particular problem of young people, particularly young people like Jan, who are unusual, going to school in an atmosphere where they're surrounded by kids who are so-called normal, and they are not quite normal. And so often it's used, they're subjected to maltreatment by their colleagues, teachers, and so on. But that's really not what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to ask you, being a young person, just starting out in a career, in a very challenged world in terms of classical music, challenged not only in our country, but certainly challenged in Europe as well, which is the birthplace of music, of our music. What are your ideas for developing a music that will appeal to younger people, to people your age? Or are we destined to have always older people in audiences?
That's a very tricky question, because I think one of the things that, of course, there's a few problems. Many people think of classical music, young people, as something boring. You know, they have the rock concerts, they go, whatever, they can yell, scream out loud. Here in classical music, I mean, they're sitting in a chair, they're not allowed to move, they should be dressed up, they should be behaving properly. So there's this kind of aura around classical music that it seems to be boring, especially for young people. And then it gets to the point, you know, that people think, you know, it's lame to be at a classical music concert, which is completely not true. Of course, you get young people who come to classical music concerts and they haven't ever been, and here they are, and they say, that was amazing. I mean, that was completely different, of course, but it's something still beautiful. And I think the best way to appeal to young people, unfortunately or fortunately, is that concerts at the moment are still too expensive for them. I've noticed recently that you know, if there's concerts that are paid, it's very difficult to get young people to justify spending, but yet when there's a free concert and they're able to come and experience it, you know, without losing anything out, then we can bring them in kind of to classical music, and they will pay for the next concert if they want to, if they liked it. But for example, in Montreal recently, there was this Nuit Blanche, which is in French white night, which means that everything's open all night, once a year kind of thing, originated in Paris. Anyways, the OSM, which is the Montreal Symphony Orchestra, was playing in a mall, in the middle of the mall, in a huge courtyard, and there was tons and tons of people. Of course, the concert was free. And there was tons of people who were willing to stand for hours to listen to this orchestra, in not the best acoustics, not the best place, but they were willing to be there and stand and listen. So I think that was one of the best lessons for me, as far as, and lots of young people too, as far as young people in classical music. And I find frequently that being able to introduce young people to classical music is a huge success always for me. I'm always very happy when I see young people at classical music concerts, because it seems to me that classical music is not dying. It is just developing in a different way. I don't think classical music will ever be able to die. That is not possible. But I think also one of the reasons that we have an older audience is that when people get older, they find more time, and they're able to choose what they're doing. They can choose, I'm going to a classical music concert. If there's a concert on Wednesday at 9 p.m. and people have to go to work the next day at 6 a.m., I mean, it's not their first choice to go to a concert at 9 p.m. So I think those are a few problems, I think.
Yes. Well, I think there are other problems, but I see your point, and I think that certainly if you as a young person take it as a challenge and make it as part of your, as I certainly have done in my life, that to really take it as a challenge and to do something about playing for young people and making sure that some of your time is spent really literally introducing young people to music and making that important connection. I want to talk about practice, because I have certain theories about it myself. How long do you practice every day, or do you practice every day, and how does that work into your schedule?
Practice is a very tricky part of describing it, because people like to ask, how much do you practice? And there is no fixed answer. When I'm at home, I try to practice lots to make up for the time spent when traveling, that I do things like this, where I can go for walks. When I'm in LA and it feels like summer for me, I get to go outside and enjoy the weather, and then I work at home. So there is no real fixed time. I think it also depends on how many concerts you have, what kind of repertoire you have to do, what do you have to learn. Generally, I'd say I definitely try to practice at least 2 hours a day, including when I'm traveling. But when I'm at home, it's more. Sometimes when I'm traveling, it's less.
It's a good answer. I always look at it that you're writing to a CD in your brain, and particularly for young people, because teachers who are teaching starting kids.
You're still writing to CDs? I thought you'd be writing to SD cards by now.
Of course. I don't know what an SD card is, but maybe you'll explain it. Jan is my guru when it comes to modern technology. He has converted me now from a RIM phone to an iPhone 4.
RIM phone meaning a BlackBerry.
BlackBerry. And we have discussions every time I see him about new apps and ways of doing things. Today, he taught me how to convert my keyboard to different languages, because I discovered that when I was in Italy and communicating in Italian or trying to write letters in French, it was consistently trying to make me write English. And it was terribly annoying, because it would correct wrongly my Italian or my French. But apparently there's a way of doing it. They showed it to me this morning. It's amazing. You can just change the keyboard, and all of a sudden it's writing in a different language. And correcting in the right language. So that's wonderful. I appreciate that very much.
But I'd like to go to, if we can, from the subjects, I'd like to go about memorizing things, because that's also something that people often ask me about, is how do you memorize? And I mean, you can't really say, here I sit down, I look at the music, I memorize. It's kind of something that you work at, and it grows within you naturally. You don't have to think about, okay, I have to memorize this piece, let me sit down, let me play it 300 times and I'll have it memorized. Maybe that'll help, but it's not the way you do it. You work, you practice normally, and then one day you close the music and you try to play it without the music. And then you see, okay, well, I can get this far, but then I get stuck, or I go back to the beginning, because music is really, it's like a maze. You can go back to the beginning frequently. There's parts that repeat, and you take the wrong exit, per se, and you go to the wrong spot in the music. So you have to work at those kinds of things. And I think it's something that, of course, can fail. We're all human beings. Unfortunately, we aren't writing to SD cards, and even if we were, SD cards do fail. So those kinds of things do happen, that you do make mistakes. I actually have a funny story with that, if I may tell it.
Of course.
Earl Wild, who is a very celebrated pianist, of course, was playing a concert, one of his last concerts in his life. And he was playing the concert with quite difficult repertoire. There was Ondine by Ravel, which is considered, the set that it comes from is considered to be one of the hardest pieces in piano repertoire. And he's playing very, very well for any age. And suddenly he stops and he starts coughing, and he coughs and coughs. And people in the audience are thinking, oh, poor man, I hope he's okay. And so he goes back to the beginning, he starts again, and gets to this roughly the same spot, stops again, and coughs really, really hard. Here he is, and okay, well, people are saying, I hope he's okay. So he starts again and plays and stops again in the same spot, and it says, okay, I forgot.
I have to tell you, that's very good, but I have to tell you a true story that involves that, and involves a Mozart concerto. I don't know whether I'm putting a hex on it or not. I was on tour with the Northern Sinfonia, which was the very first orchestra I was music director of. We were on tour in North America with a young Canadian pianist who shall remain nameless for obvious reasons in a moment. And we got to the performance, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the Mozart concerto, as you said, there are sections of music where the orchestra plays tutti and the piano comes back. Well, instead of coming back at the next section, he came back at a section 3 times ago, that was 3 times prior. So I, realizing this quickly, turned my pages back, gave the orchestra numbers, so with hand signals, and then we came back in. We reached the same place again. He did the same thing again. He did this 3 times. And on the third time, I thought, if we go this, we'll be here all night. So we have to do something. So I looked at the orchestra, gave them the number of the next tutti, and we played it, and suddenly jogged his memory, and we were okay. But those things do happen. But, I think from a standpoint of memory, it's very individual how you memorize. It depends whether you're an oral person or whether you're a written person, in the sense that I know Zubin, for instance. I went to a concert of his during the course of this week, which was absolutely spectacular. It's 50th anniversary as music director of the Israel Philharmonic. And it was such a mature experience, his relationship between him and the orchestra, something I think we see all too rarely these days. But I know that Zubin, for example, has a photographic memory. He can tell you where the watermarks are on a page. He can tell you where, he has a scribble here or a marking there. Other people, I find that my memory is more oral than it is written. That by going through a work, by hearing it in my head, that's the best way to memorize. And in fact, I do most of my memorization at night when I sleep, in a sense, by studying the score beforehand and going to bed with it. The next morning I wake up and I have a greater understanding of it. Something happens during the course of the night. Somebody who's better at understanding the human brain can tell me whether that's workable or not, or why that happens. But I think it's individual. One thing is certain, that it's vital, I think, for us to continue to memorize for as long as we live. That the act of memorization helps to keep our brain active and young. I would like you to go ahead and tell me, if you look into the future, let's not look so far. Let's look 10 years into the future. Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
That's a very tricky question. Where do I see myself? I'm currently enjoying my life very much. I'm enjoying the travel. I'm enjoying the performances. I'm enjoying meeting people. I love all parts of it, including the hotels and everything, especially the hotel pools, if they're nice. So I enjoy everything. So if I can continue doing what I'm doing right now, I'll be very happy, and I really hope that'll be the case. That's pretty much all I can say. I hope I can keep performing with new orchestras and meeting. I don't think I'll ever be able to meet such a person like you, but meeting people that are lesser than you but close.
Well, now I won't be able to walk out of the room. No, I really consider that a great compliment coming from you, because I admire you greatly. But I'm not talking just about music and concert giving. I mean, we can look that far. But from a personal standpoint, you're a young man. How do you see your life going on? I mean, do you see yourself dedicated in such a way that is family part of your own family is such an important part of your current modus vivendi? I mean, I think you're an absolutely ideal child in many ways. And though I know your parents...
Please tell my parents that.
Well, they're right over there. I'm very open about it. I think you are a wonderful child, and you have extraordinary parents. I think you're so fortunate.
That's true.
You have a mother whom I know best. I know your dad slightly, but I know your mom really well. And the combination of allowing you to do what you want to do, of discipline and at the same time expectation, is really ideal parenting. And she's devoted her life to you at this point in your growing up, and I think you should be very grateful. I know you are. But when you look at yourself, relationships, how old exactly are you now? I can never remember where you are with birthdays.
Almost 16.
Okay, so you're 15. It's amazing, when you think we've been listening to a 15-year-old.
I was just about to say, come on, Boris, I'm only 15. How am I supposed to know that?
No, but you, at 15 already, you have a view of that. Surely you have. You've got hormones and all those lovely things, and you're consistently surrounded by more and more attractive women. I'm very jealous. No, but seriously.
You have a beautiful wife. You didn't say that.
No, I'm joking. We've been married for 35 years, and our relationship is wonderful, and I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate. But I think, the aspect of choosing a partner, and is that a part of you as you see your life, or do you see your life purely from a musical standpoint?
No, I mean, there's obviously a personal standpoint, and I feel very much so that everything in my life happens naturally. We say with my mom that, I'm never spread out the red carpet to enter somewhere. I don't have people who have connections and say, well, can you play here? And, push doors, open doors, for me. It's always I enter the back door, which is fantastic because it's more natural that way. And I think with everything, it's very natural in that sense that, I enter, everything happens the way, the way it should, the way it is. Even with school, for example, we were worried, what will I do when the time will come to go to university? And here we go. It just resolved itself practically. I mean,
but what's happening?
I'm going to Toronto, and it was a very simple decision. I like the teacher, I like the school, it has good pianos, full scholarship, and it's still in Canada and it's close to home. So that was, I think, my main reasons for being there. Close to home, is a 4-hour flight, but that's close in Canada. Those things kind of came together naturally, and I think everything in my life so far has come together very naturally, so I'm not too worried.
No, I wouldn't expect you to be worried. Now, when you say naturally, what's really fascinating about when I look at your life and what's happening to you, it's natural and yet unnatural, because most people have great ambitions for desire to produce and do what he's doing now, and yet it has all come to him very naturally because of your unusual gift. It's not natural what's happening to you. It is unusual. And it's unusual, though, because of something that I'm sure you're not even aware of, and nor should you be. It's something that comes from within you. I'm sure Mozart didn't know that he was that gifted. Beethoven for sure didn't know that he was that gifted. And it took time for that to actually occur and for people to recognize that. And in the case of those composers, it didn't happen in their lifetimes, regrettably, or not very much anyway, certainly not in the case of Mozart. But in your case, you are realizing that dream. I want to talk about teachers for a moment. You're in the kind of situation in terms of your accomplishment where technically you don't need somebody to teach you something. What do you look for in a teacher? Why, and do you feel you need a teacher?
Yes, I feel, very tough to start. I want to start in the right way. I think everybody can be your teacher. Doesn't matter if it's a conductor, a violinist. You always learn. It's great to be around a musician. You can talk music. You can learn from them just by listening to them play or even talk about music. You always learn. I think the most important thing for me right now is to be guided properly. Not to do some radical, crazy things, because always, you take a first look at the piece, and where do you start is the question. Now with recordings, of course, you can listen to a recording, but that's not really a valid thing to do, because recordings are also just people's interpretations of where to start with a piece. So let's say you take a Chopin nocturne and you start with it, and you have to think of, on your own, what's your interpretation. So you take that nocturne and you think, okay, well, this is what I'll do. This is kind of what I like. And then you go to a teacher and the teacher says, well, this is slightly too radical, or this doesn't make sense because of this. That's, I think, best for me. Some people like to have teachers who tell them, do this, do this, do this, because they feel that way guided and comfortable and secure in their music. And I feel very uncomfortable with that, because I feel like somebody else is playing through me, which is not really fair, I think. And it's best to play your own interpretation, I think, because otherwise it feels unnatural, too.
Absolutely. Well, look, it's been a pleasure getting to know you, I'm sure, for this audience. And every time I sit and talk with you, I get to know you a little more and a little better. You're an extraordinary young man, and we are in for an extraordinary experience. I hope those who are listening on television will be encouraged by this exposure to Jan Lisiecki and his talent and his intelligence, and will come and enjoy the concert with us. Thank you very much, Jan Lisiecki.
I'm looking forward to it.